I consider it, I call it a historical soul retrieval of like lineage, because it's very important for Westerners to feel a connection to an unbroken lineage. So I've been like very consciously trying to continue the work of Carl Jung of like retrieving the shamanic lineage for Western civilization. So I trace that back to Atlantis, and like there are these bodhisattvic initiates, these great initiates who incarnated at the end of Atlantis to take all of the spiritual knowledge from Atlantis and plant it like seeds in the new world. So this is where ancient Egyptian culture really comes from. It comes from Atlantis. The great pyramids of Atlantis were not built by the Egyptians. They were built by the earlier civilization, and the Egyptians just inhabited it and used it. But the Great Pyramid was not built by the Egyptians.
Which is also fascinating because, probably a lot of people aren't familiar. Like, if you actually read the glyphs, they trace back their kingdoms something like 35,000 years.
Exactly.
And it's completely ignored by modern.
It's completely suppressed. Yeah. It's straight up suppressed because there is a conspiracy to conceal our true spiritual origins. I mean, when the Roman Church started persecuting, the first thing the Romans did when they went into Britannia was to genocide the Druids. That because the Druids were a shamanic ruling class. It was a civilization ruled by shamans. They were the leaders, and the Romans that's the first thing they did was exterminate the Druids. There's something in the Roman spirit that is anti-spiritual, that wants to cut off humanity from the spirit, like a disease, like an evil impulse. And that impulse took over Christianity, and then cut off the gnosis of Christianity. Christianity, if you study like the occult history, you see that Christianity emerged out of the mysteries, the entheogenic mysteries. So originally Christianity was entheogenic. But when the Roman emperor took over, he took the dogma but cut off the entheogenic sacraments and created a kind of empty form of it. And then took this empty form and made it into a dogma, and then forced this dogma on civilization, and then persecuted and exterminated the shamans, the witches and the Gnostics and the people that were carrying on the entheogenic knowledge, the shamanic knowledge. So we've inherited, and then that impulse, I call it like the Roman impulse, or like the anti-spiritual impulse. It evolved out of the Roman Church into scientific materialism, and then psychiatric materialism in our time, but also it evolved into fallen secret societies that like basically practice black magic, and they have been very deliberately concealing our true history, so that we don't feel this unbroken connection to Atlantis, that we don't feel this unbroken connection to this entheogenic mysteries, that we don't feel our shamanic lineage. They cut off our shamanic lineage and make us believe that we evolved from monkeys, and that the first civilization was in Sumeria, and there's no God, and the origin of the universe is some big bang, and it's a godless paradigm that is being given to us, and the part of the godless paradigm has to do with the official academic history of human history, right? If we know that we come from a long chain, an unbroken chain of illuminated spiritual beings, like there was an illuminated great bodhisattvic figure in Hindu mythology, named Manu. And this Manu figure was the one who took all of the knowledge, knew that Atlantis was going to be destroyed, was told, and was given this mission of taking all of the spiritual treasures of Atlantis and then preserving it. And so in esoteric history you have the story of Manu, who took all of his initiates from Atlantis and did this migration across Europe into the Himalayas. and like waited out the flood in the Himalayas, and then sent his initiates down the mountains, like into India, into Egypt, into Persia, and like planted the seeds for what we call the post-Atlantean epoch of civilization. So
Which is fascinating because even that's what the Vedas, which that knowledge is from there.
exactly.
It's so fascinating because in the Vedas, which is kind of the oldest knowledge that we know of, they say, there's this beautiful, it can be translated different ways, but there's this beautiful quote after all of this knowledge is presented is something like, or so this is what the ancient ones taught us.
Yeah. So the Vedas, people like even like again this story of like concealing our true history and cutting it off from the magnitude of how ancient it is. Even like Vedic scholars say that the Vedas are maybe 3,000 years old. Bull. They are 12,000 years old. They were transmitted orally for thousands of years before they were written down. They were transmitted orally. The Vedas are from the end of Atlantis. These are from the holy rishis were initiated, like as the story goes. The holy rishis were the initiates of this Manu figure, and every like mythology has a record of the flood and a record of this Manu figure. In Judeo-Christianity, his name is Noah, and the story goes, he gathered a bunch of animals onto a boat. But the story, the symbolism of the story is more important than the literal. Like, it's not about, like, preserving the genetics of the animals and repopulating the earth with animal genetics. It's not, like, about that. It's about, like, rescuing the treasures from the old world and replanting it in the new world. And, like, ancient Sumeria in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which they also say is one of the oldest stories, like, you have the figure Utnapishtim, who's the Noah figure, who's the Manu figure, who's the only mortal to achieve immortality. And Gilgamesh has to go visit him, in the story of Gilgamesh. That's that same figure. So this is a very important figure in esoteric history, who is the transition from the Atlantean cataclysm to the post-Atlantean epoch. And he's like the initiator of like Hermes Trismegistus and Zarathustra and all of these like great civilizational founders, So in this webinar, which I'm really happy with how this webinar turned out. It's like 5 hours, but I trace from Atlantis, like the esoteric chain, right up to the present, like right up to Carl Jung and Rudolf Steiner and the work that I'm doing in the School of Modern Soul Science and Soul Invictus. Like I trace this lineage, and this I think has a lot of benefit for Westerners to kind of have this paradigm, because it helps them feel connected to this unbroken chain. And that's what we need. That's exactly what's been attacked by this evil Roman, like anti-spiritual impulse, right? That is now like working through like secret societies, but for hundreds and for centuries was working through the church structure, So yeah, Atlantis, and then like ancient Egypt, and like a crucial part in this chain is Alexandria. Because what happens is in this like every once in a while, like when there's transition periods, like when there's the end of one civilization and the beginning of another, it's like the torch gets passed. And so you have this figure of Manu who's passing the torch from Atlantis to his initiates, which are all like the leaders of the post-Atlantean civilization. That's like a bodhisattvic act of like passing the torch across the transition of epochs. And so you have like major transitional epochs, like the end of a whole epoch, like the Atlantean epoch, which ends in cataclysm. But then you have like mini epochal transitions, like the transition from ancient Egypt to ancient Greece, for example. Like Alexander conquered ancient Egypt, and he conquered ancient Persia. And like when you have like these empires falling, you have new empires emerging. And in this transition period, you have this Hermes impulse, this hermetic impulse of translating into a new language the shamanic knowledge, or the initiatic, the mystery school knowledge. Westerners going through on a shamanic path, it benefit a lot from studying Western occult history, because that helps us to put things into real perspective and understand a bigger picture, like that we're in likewise a transition time now. You know, there's a lot of gringo English speakers here in Peru, for example. We're going through a kind of transition period now. We're going through an epochal transition period now. And there was an epochal transition period around the time of Cleopatra in the Ptolemaic Empire. We call it empire? I don't know if you call it an empire. And you had this translocation of occult knowledge, of spiritual knowledge, moving to a new geography, and also moving into a new language. So there was this I don't know what language they spoke in Atlantis, right? But like there was a translation of Atlantean wisdom into the languages of ancient Egypt, ancient Persia, ancient Mesopotamian city-states. Like it got translated into, let's say, ancient Egyptian Coptic. But then in Alexandria you have this emperor, you know, this warlord, Alexander, who conquers through military conquest empires. And then underneath this military conquest, you have this thing happening spiritually, where the spiritual knowledge makes that transition. So through the military conquest of Alexander, he founds the city of Alexandria and the Library of Alexandria. And then you have, under this blanket of this military empire, you have all of the spiritual wisdom and all of these conquered civilizations getting consolidated and getting translated into new language. So in the reign of Alexandria, in the birth of Alexandria, you have ancient Egyptian wisdom being translated into the Greek language. You have ancient Egyptian sages transmitting and imparting their unbroken, their wisdom, which goes back to Atlantis, and the Greeks recognized that the Egyptians had this ancient unbroken lineage of knowledge, and they valued it, they praised it. They saw that in Alexandria they were receiving this vast Egyptian inheritance, and they were now joining a new link in this chain. So the knowledge goes from like Egyptian into Greek. And then in the Greek, but then, so for like 600 years, the mystery knowledge generates like a sort of wisdom in Greece, and gives birth to this phenomenon we call Hermeticism, and what we now today call alchemy comes from ancient Egyptian wisdom. But then you have more military conquest. You have the military conquest of Islam, like this kind of like a military religious fusion of like Islam comes and conquers the Middle East, it conquers Alexandria, it conquers Jerusalem, and absorbs all of the spiritual knowledge that was hiding there at the time. So all the Greek occult knowledge gets translated into Arabic, and it goes to Baghdad. And now there's and so it's like the phenomenon of Alexandria, like, which is, I call it the Hermetic impulse. To me, the Hermetic impulse is the eclectic weaving together of streams of spiritual wisdom to create like a new weave. That to me is like the work of Hermes archetype, like, and translating into a new language. This translation into language is a Hermes. Hermes is the god of the messenger god, the god of communications, the messenger of the gods. So this, I call this kind of archetypal Hermetic impulse. It's what created Alexandria. You had all the sages from Egypt, from even Buddhist sages and Christian Gnostics and Persian and like Chaldean astrology and all these things fusing into this new Hermeticism. Hermeticism gets conquered, Alexandria gets conquered by the Arabs, the Muslims, and gets translated into Arabic, and then the spirit of Alexandria reincarnates in Baghdad. So in the year, I think in the 700s, the caliphs founded this city, or made Baghdad the capital of this Islamic empire, and created a library, which they called the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. And so in the 800s, the same thing that happened in Alexandria happened in Baghdad, where the caliph invited and paid for sages and initiates, spiritual initiates from every civilization in that part of the world, like from China, even as far as China, India, and Greek sages, and like all from all parts of the world, they all came to Baghdad, and all of the wisdom was translated into Arabic. And so this gave rise to a golden age of Islamic civilization. This is a complete golden age of Islamic civilization. And for 400 years, alchemy continued to evolve. And this gave rise to many of the treasures of mathematics and medicine and magic too, like magic, alchemy, medicine. The Hermes Trismegistus, like the three great sciences of Hermes, thrice greatest, like alchemy, astrology, and magic. So the spirit of Hermes Trismegistus, he moved from Alexandria to Baghdad, and for 400 years, and then through again like military conquest, the Islamic civilization conquered all of Northern Europe, and so you have this not Northern Europe, Northern Africa. And so all from modern day Israel and Jerusalem and all along the northern part of Africa, all the way up through Morocco, and then across the Strait of Gibraltar into Spain. And then you have 700 years of war between Christians and Muslims in the Iberian Peninsula. But underneath this this war, you have knowledge being transmitted across civilization. So you have another transition. So the knowledge from Baghdad, the Hermetic knowledge and the occult knowledge, the knowledge of alchemy, astrology, and magic, was all the way up in Spain by that time. And we're talking now about the 1200s. And then finally, the Christians, the conquistadors, they won the Reconquista. They finally took Granada. They won the Iberian Peninsula for Christianity, right? And then in Toledo, they created a school of translation called the Toledo School of Translators, where they now had all these wisdom books in Arabic. And they now translated all these Arabic wisdom books into Latin and into early Spanish. And then from here, the Hermetic knowledge, which was repressed by the Catholic Church or the Proto-Catholic Church in the 300s and the 400s, which was persecuted, paganism was persecuted when Roman became quote Christian, it's now returning to Europe through Spain. And so now you have the beginnings of an occult renaissance in Spain. And this is the actual real origins of the Renaissance, is the return of occult knowledge back into Europe, which is now in the Latin language. So that creates the Renaissance. Then you have the translation of the Corpus Hermeticum in Italy, and then you have this rebirth of culture in Europe after a very, very, very dark period of time. And Europe goes through a kind of collective shamanic initiation, like a death, dismemberment, and rebirth. And the Renaissance is like a macrocosmic shamanic rebirth in Europe after they've been through the Black Death, and the Roman Church is genociding the Cathars and genociding the Templars. And the Cathars and the Templars, they had the entheogenic knowledge, they had the shamanic knowledge, and the Roman Church, committed genocide upon them. And you have this Inquisition and the very, 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 very dark time in Europe, but that was the shamanic dismemberment that gave rise to the Renaissance. And if you look at the occult roots of the Renaissance, you're going to find entheogenic initiation. You're going to find the work of the Rosicrucians. The Rosicrucians are these entheogenically initiated pagan Christian mages that go around initiating artists into entheogens. And then you start to see masterpieces of art emerge. And if you look closely at the art, you can find psilocybin mushrooms hidden in all the art, because there was like a secret stream of entheogenic mystery knowledge that was being imparted to the artists. And so this is another thing that Westerners don't realize, is that there's actually like a lineage of entheogenic Christian art. And you can find it. You can find mushrooms absolutely everywhere in Christian masterpieces, like hidden. It's like, where's Waldo? It's like, where's the mushroom? You can look at the painting and you find the mushrooms and they're hidden. And it's unmistakable once you know how to look for them. Like you find them everywhere. So this is unbroken chain again. Like the knowledge gets translated again. It gets translated into Latin. You have the rise of medieval alchemy, European alchemy now. It started in Greece and went to Islam, and now it's in Europe. And then you also have shamanic knowledge, visionary knowledge, being transmitted by entheogenically initiated artists. So if you look at medieval art, you find you find visions. You find these are like artist shamans who are having visions and painting their visions and transmitting teachings through their visionary art. And so this is another part of the unbroken chain through the medieval and then into the Renaissance. But then in the Renaissance, something really serious happened. You have the beginnings of secret societies, and because there's so much persecution of the shamanic impulse, the trauma makes people vulnerable to being infiltrated. Like trauma is like a hook for darkness to enter in. And so because the secret societies emerged as a traumatic response to genocidal persecution, there was a dark seed planted there. And the way that occultism and secret society emerged from the Renaissance onwards, it was able to become corrupted. So starting in the Renaissance, you have the first secret society, which was actually a really good and noble secret society, which was the Rosicrucians. They were entheogenic pagan Christians, like Christian alchemists. They started a secret society to try to rescue Western civilization from the clutches of the Roman Church, because the Roman Church was like had an anti-spiritual stranglehold on civilization. So they were working in secret to oppose this kind of satanic impulse of the Roman Church. But then that created a how do you say, like a kind of prototype for that could be corrupted. And the prototype is a secret society of highly powerful initiates and magicians who work behind the scenes to influence world events, to steer the world in a certain direction. And so what's an impulse that started pure was infiltrated and corrupted. And it gave rise to an anti-Rosicrucian secret society that kind of like took the ideals of the original Rosicrucians and like inverted it. And they used like alchemy and magic in order to do kind of black alchemy, dark, evil alchemy on the world and steer the world in another direction. And so we're living right now in the fruits of that. This has been going on for like 300 plus years. And we're living in this world where there's like evil shamans that are basically running the world. So this is our Western lineage. This is our like story. So we actually have a story. And when Westerners get initiated, when Westerners experience a shamanic awakening, it's really necessary for them to learn their lineage. So this is something I'm teaching, is like the Western shamanic lineage, and it's inseparable from occultism, secret societies, Rosicrucianism, the story of Christianity, the story of the Roman Church, the story of the Rosicrucians fighting against the Roman Church, the corruption of the Rosicrucian impulse, the beginning of evil secret societies, and now we're living in a world where black magic is being practiced in a like globally, macrocosmic black magic, like the earth itself is being subjected to black magic, and there's black magicians that are experts at this. And there's Westerners that are like that's triggering a kind of crisis for them. They realize that they're living in like this corrupted world. They start to have this spiritual awakening and they don't know where to go to pursue their initiation. So they go to the Amazon, So I guess that brings us to like, you know, where like, we're here in the Sacred Valley. The Sacred Valley is filled with spiritual seekers that are seeking initiation, and they're kind of like where Westerners need to kind of like take what they can where they can find it, like, and each person resonates with a different elder, and people find elders in this culture and that culture, and there's a real weaving happening here. So like, you know, so remember I was talking about, so first it went like Atlantean wisdom into Egypt. Here's how I trace it: Atlantean wisdom into Egyptian mysteries. The Egyptian mysteries transitioned into the Greek mysteries and Hermeticism. The Greek mysteries transitioned into the wisdom of Islam and alchemy and astrology and magic for 400 years in Islam. Then it got translated into Latin, and it spread into Europe. And then in around the 1900s, it got translated into German through Carl Jung and Rudolf Steiner. Carl Jung and Rudolf Steiner are two bodhisattvic initiates who translated the wisdom from like Latin, and they turned it into German. And then in the 1900s, there was a huge publication of occult wisdom, particularly through Rudolf Steiner, who's a link in the Rosicrucian chain, translated into German. And now in the 21st century, it's like it's been translated into English. So I think like now there's a lot of the Hermetic impulse is now generated in the English language. So I do a lot of work of translating the wisdom of Rudolf Steiner into modern 21st century English. A lot of his work has been translated into, 7,000 lectures have been translated into English. But good luck finding a shamanic seeker in the 21st century that has the patience to read the work of Rudolf Steiner. He was a teacher and a bodhisattvic initiate for 100 years ago. His time and place was 100 years ago, when Europeans were very erudite. They were reading a lot. It was the heyday of theosophy. People could sit down and listen to lectures for like 3 hours and maintain focus. Now we have like all these like phones and TVs, and like we're bombarded by so much stimulus that we can no longer take in knowledge in the same way. So knowledge needs to be given in a new way that's appropriate for our century. So that's one of the things that I try to do, is to try to like translate the earlier link in the chain, which is Rudolf Steiner, try to translate his teachings into something that, you know, shamanic seekers in the Sacred Valley, for example, would readily be able to absorb. So that's like the tone of the teachings in my school, is like Rudolf Steiner like updated for the 21st century.